Okay, we should begin. So, welcome and thank you again for coming. It's a huge pleasure for us, and I really appreciate your time and effort. Thank you, William Gairdner, very much.
Thank you for
Um,
having
I think that we agreed that we are going to try to focus on your entire book, and every Sunday we are going to try to have one chapter, which we are going to analyze in great depth and details, except for next Sunday, which you have your Thanksgiving, right?
me. Yes,
Yes, very good. So today we are going to begin with the first chapter, which is the state versus the family, right?
yes.
Okay. Before we go into the chapter, I would just like for you to explain something that we spoke about the previous time, your position about libertarianism. You had quite a strong position against it. If you can maybe explain it a little better.
Oh dear. Okay. Um, I would say when I made the switch in my life from thinking about literature and all that to thinking about politics and morality and the nature of modernity, um, I got my start through libertarianism, specifically economic libertarians who were promoting the ideology of the free market and individual choice and all this kind of thing. And, you know, Friedrich Hayek and his Road to Serfdom, Milton Friedman and his influential book, which he wrote with his wife, the name of which escapes me at the moment. You probably know the title of it. But
I
anyway,
think Hobbes, right?
Free to Choose. It was called Free to
Yeah.
Choose.
Hmm.
By the way, that's a phrase which I think has become troublesome in our time, and I can explain later why I say that.
Hmm.
So anyway, I was very much on side with fiscal libertarianism, and I still am. I'm a libertarian when it comes to free markets, free enterprise, and the
So,
financial
if
thriving
I,
of private individuals.
so if I may ask, you would support the Austrian School of Economics,
Yeah,
Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard?
yes, insofar as I understand them, I do. You mentioned the name Murray Rothbard. Where I have trouble with Rothbard is not in his theories of economics and political liberty, it's in his moral position. Um, for example, all you have to do to understand my objection to him and other libertarians like him, this is where I split company with my libertarian friends, uh, is his view on abortion, where he basically thinks nothing at all about defining the unborn human being as a form of property which has invaded the womb of its mother and has no right to exist there without her permission. So that if she doesn't want the child, she's free to kill it, since it's not a human being anyway. I find that an incredibly distressing view coming from a man as intelligent as him, and I fault him grievously for it. I wish I had an opportunity to sit and debate the matter with him because I think he would lose. As I mentioned last time, I think even our own prime minister, former prime minister, the father of our present prime minister, who in my view doesn't deserve the title, by the way, he's all but a child ruling us from the top seat in this confederation, and it's embarrassing. His father was a much brighter man, much more resolute in his decision making, and he had grounds for almost everything he said, many of which I didn't agree with either. But when he was confronting a radical feminist who quoted Rothbard, the libertarian, on why she had a right to kill her unborn child, uh, he said, "It's my body." She said, "It's my body, my choice." And Trudeau simply said, "We're not talking about your body. We're talking about someone else's body." I thought it was very honest and straightforward of him, even though he helped to bring in the laws, which eventually ended up legalizing abortion in Canada. And by the way, abortion in Canada has never actually been legalized. All that happened was that the law against it was simply thrown out, but no new law has ever been created since that time. So we are actually a country with no law whatsoever governing the death or life of an unborn child.
So what is the current policy in Canada about abortion right now?
Pardon me?
What is the policy in Canada about abortion?
There is no policy. That's what I'm trying to say. If you can find a doctor who will do it, go do it.
Insane.
It's up to him. There's no law governing him. I don't think there's even, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's even a law against this dreadful practice called partial birth abortion. I mean, really, if you wanted to focus on a vicious attack on human life at the very heart of the family, and you can't get much closer to the heart of the family than the womb of a pregnant woman. But if you wanted to focus on that, you'd have to say this, above all, is an attack on the family. I don't know if your listeners even know what partial birth abortion is.
No, can you please explain it to us?
It's terrible, but I will. It makes me feel almost sick to talk about it.
I'm sorry.
But in many modern democracies, the law basically defines the unborn. Well, it doesn't define the unborn child. It says that the fetus, is not a human being until it passes completely from the body of its mother, alive from the body of its mother. And then we describe it as a human being in Canada. But before that, it's not a human being. So in the case of women who want to abort, say, a 6 or 7 pound baby, and that is not very frequent, but it does happen, partial birth abortion was invented to make that possible. It's very difficult for a woman to abort a 6 or 7 pound baby. So what the abortionist does is he basically turns the child around. He doesn't call it a child. He turns the child around and pulls it out of the birth canal by its feet and then the rest of its body. And because he doesn't want to go to jail for murder, he can't pull the whole baby out and kill it. So he kills it while its head is still inside the woman's so-called birth canal. And what he does is he takes a special pair of scissors and pushes it into the back of the skull of the baby's head, because when the cervix is not ripe, it's very difficult for a woman to pass, a head as large as a small grapefruit. So he has to collapse the head. So he pushes the scissors into the back of the skull, sucks out the brains to collapse the skull, and then now the baby's dead. So no lawyer is going to attack him for murder, and he pulls the baby out and throws it away, or sells body parts or whatever it is that he does with what remains of the unborn child. That's called partial birth abortion. I don't know if it's ever happened in Canada because no one's telling, although I would not be surprised if it has. It's happened in America quite a bit until very recently, when more public animus came to bear against it. Probably thousands of children in America have been killed with partial birth abortion. It's a particularly grotesque methodology for escaping the law.
It's despicable. I cannot stand it. You mentioned earlier that Moray Rothbard had this position about abortion. Another one, which is so disappointing to know that she also had a similar approach, is Ayn Rand.
Yes.
Also was extremely in favor of abortions. But what are your other arguments against libertarianism?
Well, that's probably the main one. I think it covers a large area because it's probably the most important application of the theory to a moral question. But I think there are many others. I don't think we live as individuals in a vacuum. We live by connection with other human beings. The libertarian operates on the principle that first we are individuals, and then we create society basically by contract. You find this theory in John Locke, who was the first philosopher of significance to bring it to the West. I think he was wrong. Burke put point to that when he talked about society as a compact. He also used the word contract, by the way, but there's a difference between a contract and a compact. A contract can be something that happens right now between you and me, say. We make a deal, we call it a contract, and we sign it. A compact is something that has an historical basis, which we inherit as a communal agreement with respect to human behavior and human society and how it shall exist, how it shall proceed, the care it takes with respect to the future, and so on. That's a compact. It's very different. So Burke talked about the civil society in a famous quote, and I guess I'm paraphrasing, but I think I'm pretty close, as a compact between the dead, the living, and those yet to be born. So he saw civil society as an enduring, well-functioning organism and not a contract. So that's a very different view, by the way, of what democracy is supposed to be. And I often have this debate with people who talk about their democratic right as if it's only right now. And that's what you tend to get from radicals, because what they're trying to do with their philosophy of democracy is to give greater expansion and expression to the individual will. This is what happened during the French Revolution when Robespierre and all these guys, Marat and so on, it was all about individual will. So, for example, marriage during the French Revolution became reduced to a simple contractual expression of the will of two people. And their idea was that as long as there's a meeting of the minds, that this marriage should continue, then this is a marriage. But as soon as one of the parties disagrees and doesn't want to be married anymore and says it's not a marriage, or at least not one that I want, then the marriage is over. Because in the view of the revolutionists, which was all about expression of individual will, marriage that hasn't got both wills on side is not a marriage at all. So to hell with it. And by the way, that's the attitude which has become regnant in countries like Canada today. I don't know about where you live, but in Canada today, I say you can't get married anymore. Not in any traditional sense. It used to be, when marriage used to be a civil institution, it took two to make it and two to break it. Now it takes two to make it still, but only one to break it. So a wife or a husband can walk into their partner and simply say, I don't want to be married anymore. I want out of this. I want to divorce you. By the way, this is what happens in Islamic countries. And the Christian countries of the West, most of them, I don't think all of them, but most of them have become that way themselves. A divorce is a unilateral decision of one spouse. And that doesn't matter if the other spouse has been incredibly observant of the morality of the marriage. They can be kicked out. I think if you want to talk about the moral collapse of Western society, that's the template. It's terrible. It means marriage is over. And I think that's one of the reasons we see so many people today who are getting married, holding their baby, like the mother maybe said, I think we should get married now. We have a child. Oh, okay. That kind of thing. But nobody thinks it's unusual. It's even kind of cute. Look, they're bringing a baby to their wedding. That kind of thing. Well, that's a phenomenally different view of the bonds of marriage from what really was at the heart of Western society for a very long time. Maybe not always. Maybe in the early days it was weaker or whatever. But over time it got the view of marriage as a bond of two people which could be broken, but only with difficulty and only with the agreement of both parties. And that's all gone now, at least in Canada.
It's everywhere. In your first chapter, you are speaking about this topic, the triangle of human history, which you define as the basic social unit. Can you explain and focus a little more about the confusion between the basic political unit, which is the individual, and the social unit, which is the family?
Yes, the argument I make in that chapter is that the basic political unit of all societies is the individual. That was even true in ancient Rome and Athens. The individual was the basic political unit, but certainly not the basic social unit. That has always been the family in the West until very recently. And the argument I make in my book, The War Against the Family, is that one of the objectives of the modern egalitarian state is to atomize. That's a term that comes from physics, of course. You conceive of civil society as comprised of molecules. Let's call it the family molecule: the father, the mother, the children, the grandparents, the great-grandchildren, whatever. I'm not arguing about how large it has to be, but the basic social unit is the family, not the individual. And the thrust of the modern egalitarian state is to convert one into the other, to really end the basic social unit by converting it into a basic political units. So in my country, for example, when I grew up, our family had a family health card. Now we all have individual health cards. You know, it's nothing to do with the family. When I grew up, this is 60 years ago. I'm 81 next week. 60 years ago, 60 years ago, an individual, as I say, who wanted health care got it through his family unit. Now anybody can get it as an individual. And further to that, the teacher at the teenager school is not required to tell the mother or father that the girl is pregnant and she wants an abortion. The teacher will arrange it, talking to the doctor himself or sending the girl to an abortion clinic without any legal requirement to inform her own mother and father about something that serious that's going on in her life. So part of the fragmentation and the atomization of society is very much a willed thrust of the modern egalitarian state. And why is that so? Because it's much easier to control millions of people as individual digits on a computer. Okay, before the computer was a ledger book or something, than it is to control them as a family where they can hide, so to speak. They can take refuge within the family structure. Now, by the way, that's an important phrase there, taking refuge inside the family. My dear friend Ian, who's a British historian of note, and I may have mentioned this last time, but it's worth repeating. He said that in England, even as late as the 18th century, the monarch had no legal right to enter into a private home without the permission of the homeowner. We find that amazing today. We find that amazing. What? The most powerful person in the land can't just walk into your house and start ordering you around? No way. No way. I don't know what the case is today in England, but I think in Canada, and we see this with COVID, all sorts of public officials now find, well, I should say they don't find themselves empowered. They're empowering themselves to kick citizens around all over the place with respect to what citizens for some time have considered their basic rights, freedoms, and privacies and protections. It disappears so quickly. I think one of the only blessings of the COVID regime here politically is that the citizens are getting for most of them, the first taste of power at work on the ground in their own communities, and how they can be denied, deprived, kicked around because they haven't done A or B or C. When they feel they haven't harmed anyone, they haven't actually done anything. They're being forced to do something. You know, by the way, I don't want to get into this whole COVID thing here, but I do think it's the first time in modern memory where millions of citizens have, who are not sick, have been confined to house arrest.
Yes.
Which is pretty odd when you think how easily this has happened. No one believed that. If you told them this theoretically, as I have done in most of my books 30 years ago, well, you get laughed at, or you get called an extreme right winger or something like that. And one of the things that makes me happy about what's going on in our midst, and by the way, I'm not personally, especially someone who's 81, I'm not someone who thinks that COVID is an innocent thing. I think the whole metric is wrong and people are discussing it on the wrong basis. But I do think also there's an incredible amount of panic and public position propaganda and positions being taken by minor officials of the state, which they're enjoying. And I probably mentioned last time again, I think it's brought out something in the Canadian character. I always say that inside every American is a little frontiersman, because, you know, they sort of started that way. America was the New Jerusalem, and the settlers were coming to create a kind of secular version of the biblical heaven on earth in America. Canada was a little bit different. Canada remained British. It didn't go for that Lockean individualism sort of thing. And that's why 50 or 80,000 so-called British Empire loyalists moved to Canada as soon as the revolution started. They got out of there and they came to Canada. So they like law and order. Now, it's interesting. I'm digressing a bit, but it interests me.
No, it's good. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, the motto in America comes out of their Declaration of Independence, you know, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We could spend a whole hour talking about that little motto. The citizens have a right to life. Well, not if you're not born yet, you know, and so on. Liberty. Well, can the average citizen actually describe what a reasonable sense of liberty is? You know, and should any government rest its entire philosophical canon on the idea of pursuing happiness? I was out for a bike ride with my friends yesterday, and one of them, we were talking about, you know, what's life all about? And one of them said, well, you know, I think it's about happiness. It's exactly what he said. And I said, I don't think so. I said, I think happiness is a product of, or a byproduct of goodness. So what we ought to be talking to our citizens and our children about is how to be good. And if they can figure out how to be good, they will probably be happy. Leaving aside extreme cases like terrible, terrible poverty and physical illness and stuff that most of us can't help. In general, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is an odd sort of thing to hold up as a flag for your citizens. Well, what's the Canadian variation? Remember, as I said, 50, 80,000, I don't know how many, I don't think anybody knows how many, but at least 50,000 Americans, or what they called themselves British Empire loyalists, fled to Canada during the Revolution. And the slogan in Canada's Constitution, which is called the British North America Act, now it's got a little bit of a different name because Pierre Trudeau imposed upon us, I'm going to say imposed because there was some agreement politically, but basically he was a strong man who imposed his so-called Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and he integrated it into that BNA Act. But the slogan of the BNA Act is peace, order, and good government. Well, that's a very different motto to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, isn't it? You see,
but if I may ask,
sorry, go ahead.
You said good government. Isn't that by definition an oxymoron? I mean, maybe we should take a step back and try to establish what is, in your opinion, the role of government at all. Like, what is a good government?
Well, I'd like to try to answer that. When I was younger, I went with Thoreau. You know, Thoreau's definition of good government. He said, the best government is the least. And that's the most pithy and little definition you could find, that the best government is the least. The least that any people can tolerate and live properly with respect for each other and respect for the law and so on. So I'm a minimalist when it comes to government. And I think our people here in Canada were that way for the first 50, 75 years of the existence of this country. We started with the idea of a minimalist government, the state as a night watchman, you know, rules of common conduct, laws equal for all, no special treatment, and the government should not be sticking its nose into your private life any more than necessary, if any of it was necessary at all. Well, it is, like our own Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, the father, as I said, of the guy who's doing it now. Sorry to be so disrespectful. I don't mean to disrespect the office of Prime Minister, just the person who's in it. Yes. But Pierre Trudeau famously said, the state has no right in the bedrooms of the nation. Well, Pierre Trudeau was the living embodiment of what I call in my most recent work, a libertarian socialist. And I'm sorry that my memory's so bad. I can't remember if we discussed this last time. But I do believe that the Western democracies have landed on a common solution to the fundamental contradiction between libertarianism, if you wish, and socialism. Canada was a kind of libertarian state in the sense of liberty of citizens and minimal government. That's how we started. But as this thing developed, the contradiction raised its head, and no one knew what to do about it. How can you have a country with a foundation in liberty and a foundation in forced equality at the same time? I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. You can't. The only way you can do that is by dividing the body politic into two bodies, into a private body and a public body. The private body is whatever you want to do with your own body. As I say, drugs, sex, abortion, homosexuality, easy divorce, any of those things, it's all yours. Have a good time. We, the government, don't really care. Okay, there's some minor licensing stuff that we do, but basically, if you don't want to be married, just tell your spouse, get out of here. I'm tired of this marriage, and it's over. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So libertarianism rules in Canada with respect to the individual and the individual's lusts, bodily appetites, and desires. But with respect to being a government, a state, which has authority over all citizens, coast to coast, socialism rules. Now, I don't want to go too heavy on that word. It's not really socialism in the sense that the state owns the means of production and all that. But it is socialism in the sense that the state is governing who gets what in the form of whatever government services the government feels it should provide and can provide to all citizens equally. Medical care is the archetypal case of that. And by the way, I unfortunately have been using a lot of medical care lately because that's what happens when you get older. All sorts of things start to surface. And a lot of citizens will say it's a wonderful system, single payer system. It's free medical care. And I go, please, it's not free. Nothing is free. It's prepaid. Yes. The government's already taken your money to pay for your medical care. What does it cost compared to, say, a free enterprise system? Like in America, by the way, America is misunderstood medically. They have socialized medicine there for the poor, and they have socialized medicine there for anybody over 65, exactly like Canada, single payer type system for the poor and for the old. But in between, you're expected to be responsible enough to buy your own medical insurance or to take a job with a company that's going to provide it for you. By the way, that's one of the reasons that the average salary in the average American company, as high as it is as low as it is, because it would be a lot higher if the corporations weren't forking over 10 or 15,000 a year for your insurance policy for medicine or whatever it is. It changes by state.
Yeah,
I'm wondering about there, but
I remember we mentioned the last time Stefan Molyneux, for example. I remember that a few years ago he found out that he has cancer, and he is a Canadian, but yet he chose to go to America to a private doctor to get rid of it, because the time he had to wait for an appointment and to see all those different specialists in the Canadian system was so long that his life was at risk.
well,
I think
that happens to a lot of Canadians, I'm afraid to say. I'm one of them. I had a small tumor discovered on my right kidney in the beginning of August. I still haven't seen a specialist. I won't see him until December, and maybe not even then. Yeah, this was apparently a fairly benign, small tumor, which some people say active surveillance will do. You can live with it for a while, and if it starts to grow, you get it out. So I'm not panicking yet. But the difficulty you get into if you're someone like me is distrust. Are they really telling you the truth about this thing? Or is this a political position they're taking because they're getting letters from above saying if you see this disease or if you see that, and if the guy's over 65 or whatever, take it easy, slow down. He's probably going to die of something else. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? There are moral hazards that come with not only with socialized medicine, such as we have in Canada. And by the way, the government in Canada does not run the medical system. It's all privately run. Doctors are in private practice. Most hospitals in Canada, there are some public ones, but most of them are private hospitals. But they all get paid through the public system. You know, they're very quick about sending in their invoices. The moment you go into a doctor's office, the first thing they ask you for is your health card, because it's not really a health card. It's a debit card. It allows them to debit the national accounts and have money sent to them by the government for whatever it is you went there for. Boom, boom, chung, chung. That's it. So, you know, Canada spends $265 billion by now. I mean, it's going up about $1 billion a day. I don't know, per year on so-called healthcare. And one of the ways they deal with the demand, which they cannot satisfy 100%, although in my case, for most of the things I need, they're very good. You can get very good healthcare for $265 billion, but it may not be as timely as you want, as in the case of my kidney. And you may have to wait for X number of other people to get served before you. So wait times are huge here. We have a group called the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, which keeps track of wait times in Canada. And it also keeps track, insofar as this is possible, of the number of citizens who go to the U.S. Now, I went to the U.S. I went to the Mayo Clinic about 10 years ago for a problem I had. And I spoke to my doctor here and I said, I've done my research. I know there's a test that you can do to see if I'm in a good basket or a bad basket when it comes to this illness. You know what he said? He said, we do have the test, but we don't give it to people like you. And I said, why? He said, because you're not sick enough. When you get sick enough, you'll qualify for the test. And I said, that's a little backwards, don't you think? We're trying to prevent me from getting sick in the first place, wouldn't you say? Anyway, the long and short of it is I went to the Mayo Clinic and I spent $2,000 out of my pocket. It was unbelievable. Now, in Canada, I mean, I have a bunch of specialists. One of them is amazing. I can write to him today. He'll write me back today or tomorrow. Unbelievable. It's hardly ever heard of. I don't know how he does it. But for the most part, you can't get a hold of your specialist here until he decides to see you. And then one of his underlings will kind of summon you. When I went to Mayo, there was bad weather, and we had to go through Chicago and then to Minnesota to the Mayo Clinic. We got stopped in Chicago and had to stay overnight. Good heavens. The Mayo Clinic called me. Mr. Gairdner, we heard your flight got delayed. We rebooked you for 10 o'clock tomorrow. I thought, unheard of in Canada. You're just not going to get that kind of service. See? But I got it. I paid for it, and about 100,000, no one knows for sure, but I think estimates are about 100,000 Canadians a year leave Canada to get medical help offshore from private providers who are just rubbing their hands. Oh boy, another Canadian down to the Cayman Islands or Barbados or India or Mayo in the US. 100,000 people, I only spent $2,000, but a lot of these people are spending a lot more than that. A lot more than that. And in other words, it's an offshore market. And one of the arguments I make, I have a chapter on the medical, I call it medical mediocrity. And that's with due respect for the great doctors we have here and some of the great hospitals. I'm not saying they're not here. I'm just saying they're harder to get to, harder to find, takes longer, and so on. But one of the arguments I make in the book is that our so-called two-tier medical system has in fact more than two tiers. The politicians who want to get elected here, they start screaming about how horrible it is to have two-tier medicine, meaning for the rich and the poor. And I have to say to them, you get with the program. There's more than two tiers here. There's about eight tiers. And anybody who's in the system knows, for example, a doctor himself who happens to be sick, that's one tier right there. He's not going to wait 7 months to see a specialist. He's probably going to see him today or tomorrow. His nurse may be in the same bracket, and so may all his relatives and his family. If you're a National Hockey League player or a national basketball team player or whatever, you're not going to wait around for medical care. You'll probably be seen today or tomorrow and be looked after, and so on. The other tier is people who travel for medicine. They go overseas for it. And my argument is that that's mostly people who have the money. Now, if those people who are wealthy and a lot of them famous, we had a very embarrassing case for politicians where one of our researchers found out that about 8 of our very top politicians were themselves going to America for medical care, and they never told anybody, but somebody dug it up and embarrassed them publicly. I mean, really, when you think about that, it's a scandal. It's about dishonesty, and it's about a terrible unwillingness to change a system that we bought into. I was at a intellectual conference recently, and there was a very good professor of Canadian political history there. And I spoke to him about this. And he said, well, why should the money in your pocket dictate the kind of medical care you get? Well, I said, well, first of all, who said it has to be that way? And I said, because right now, the average Canadian family of 4, say, is probably, it's costing about $15,000 a year for public medical care. So there's money in somebody's pocket. But just to take your argument, I said, why should money in your pocket? I said, I noticed you're driving a really nice Lexus car. Why should money in your pocket dictate the kind of car you get to buy? Why shouldn't every Canadian get a Lexus if you're going to take that approach?
Very good.
Well, he backed up quickly. He didn't have much to say, about that. But so the argument doesn't go very deep here. It's just this. And by the way, this is at the root of the egalitarian state, is this fanatical insistence on equality in all things, even though we know that doesn't happen in nature. It doesn't happen between individuals, and it certainly doesn't happen between private families. And I'm circling around now. This is one of the things that drives the modern social welfare state to where it is today, is this idea that we can actually have equality by getting rid of the private family, or at least, I mean, we're never going to get rid of it. It's a breeding machine, right? And we need citizens, and we need their taxes to do what we do as a socialist country. But at least we can get rid of the worst effects of the private family by taxing the hell out of the rich, very progressive taxation. I mean, I don't know in your country, but in Canada, I think the last I looked, something like 60% of all income taxes in Canada are paid by the top 20%. or 15% of income earners. So it's a highly progressive tax rate, and it's even more the case in many European countries like France.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe where you, I don't know where you live, but I think you said Tel Aviv, but I don't know
Yes,
what's
near
like that.
Tel
But
Aviv.
anyway, the point is that the thrust of the egalitarian state is to atomize the private family, basically, to atomize civil society, convert everybody into a political individual, and get rid of this social thing called the family, so that they can be better organized and they can't fight back. For example, the Canadian Federation of Families, if such a thing existed, would be a very powerful lobby in this country to fight back against anti-family policies. But it doesn't exist because the family still exists. But basically, as I said, marriage doesn't exist anymore. You can't actually get legally married in the older sense of the word anymore in this country. It's a union of convenience. That's about it. So we end up here with what I call hyperdemocracy. Hyperdemocracy is a condition in which, as I say, the whole society has been atomized into individual units. And what do we have pushing all this, shoving all this around on the political table? Are egalitarian activists, specifically radical feminists, for example. And they often get upset with me when I say, listen, you have a radical agenda. You know, you want to get women out of the family, get them into the marketplace. And by the way, that's exactly what the government wants. They want your money. And they realize that they cannot be a fully functioning social welfare state unless everybody is working, including you. However, I said, you're a rich bitch with a university degree. And you're privileged already. Most women in this country who are working don't want to work in the open market. What they dearly want is they want to raise their own children at home, and they can't. They got to leave them with their not very well in-laws or parents to be looked after while they're over knitting socks or making shoes or whatever in some factory around the corner. It's not the glory that you're making it seem like. So you're speaking from privilege yourself. Why don't you stop that and ask yourself what's best for the bulk of the women in the country, and and not just you. So anyway, they this began with Betty Friedan and all those other feminists, who, by the way, in my opinion, and I've said so publicly, were one of the, and still are one of the wealthiest cohorts of women and most privileged cohorts of women in the entire history of the world. And yet this was the cohort that started all the complaining with, Betty Friedan's books, the Second Sex books, the whole thing. Aggrieved women, privileged women. What was the basis of their motive? Equality, not liberty, by the way. And they didn't get it that, if you want that kind of state, the whole country has to be run by the government. And then you're all going to lose your liberty, whatever liberty is left. So talking about the private family as a domestic jail, I always said, look, a marriage is like a 747. It takes a pilot and a navigator. I don't care whether it's the guy or the gal who's the pilot or the navigator, but neither one of them can do both. If you want to fly the airplane called the private marriage, you better sort it out between yourselves. And that's up to you. I don't want the government to sort it out or put pressure on anybody. If some woman who happens to feel that God has called her and she wants to be a doctor or a physicist or an astronaut or whatever it is, good for her. Let her go for it. It's still a free country from that point of view, but it's becoming less free all the time. And this, I think, is the big concern, and it's certainly the concern of my children, my adult children, who are seeing it all around them. Again, especially with COVID.
I would like to ask again, to burden a little bit, forgive me. You said that the best government is the least one, the smallest one. But both in the US and Canada, the governments were supposed to be limited by the Constitution to make sure that it's not going to intervene in people's affairs and private life, just, you know, to take care of foreign enemies, domestic enemies, the court. But look what happened. It's uncontrollable, and it turns into the greatest empires we've ever seen. So
Yeah.
why should we still believe that? How can we ignore the elephant in the room, which is governments have the tendency to get more power and get stronger and get bigger by corrupting the people who are voting for free stuff?
Well, I think this is why so many observers of the situation have remarked that democracies don't last. I mean, the Greek democratic system, if you want to call it that, it wasn't actually a democracy. I mean, something like 30 or 40% of all people who lived in Athens at the time were slaves. Women were not slaves generally, but they weren't citizens. It was a democracy of citizens, and there were only males over the age of 30 who had already done their military service. And so you're really talking about an oligarchic kind of or aristocratic democracy in ancient Athens, depending on the time period you're looking at. And they lost it for a while. They actually voted democracy out. They said, let's get rid of it. It's a terrible system. And oligarchy came back in, and then oligarchy got thrown out again, and so on. But I think the trend in all democratic systems, and America's done pretty well from that point of view. I mean, I don't know how old it is now, but 200 and some odd years old since 1787, I think, when their Constitution was shaped. But there's nothing in the Constitution about the things you just mentioned. It's all about divisions of power and checks and balances. And we all know what those are between the executive and the judiciary and the Congress. It was all about checking power. And in one of the greatest collections of political essays ever written, the Federalist Papers, all this was explained. And you know yourself, I'm sure, that when they turned to, I think it was Benjamin Franklin, and said, what kind of constitution is it? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. Well, he knew very well that historically, these republics have not been kept. And I think the inner dynamics of their downfall can be traced to lots of things. One of them is complication and power. I mean, it was Lord Acton who said, I think, that power corrupts, yeah. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. But even that was a fetching but erroneous statement. Power does not corrupt. It's the love of power that corrupts. Power adequately exercised in a limited way is just fine. But the love of power is what corrupts the use of power. And I think it's impossible to avoid as long as human beings are the people exercising the power. It's addictive. It's like a drug, and they just want more of it. So that being the case, you know, we get this conversion of once free societies from what I call bottom-up societies into what I have called the top-down state, which is where we are in Canada today. Now, Canada is an interesting case because Canada's own constitution, like the American Constitution, was basically structured so that what we call the provinces, like American states, what we call the provinces had certain specified duties which were spelled out and are spelled out in the Constitution still. And the federal government, which used to be called central government, and that's what it is. We now call it federal. It's a confusion of meaning because federal used to mean divided up into smaller entities. Now it means central. So I'm just going to stick with that term. Canada's federal government today has managed to find a way to intrude itself into the rights, the listed rights of each province, into which no federal government is supposed to go. How did it do that? Well, the arch case was medical care. What Trudeau Sr. said was, listen, we need to give all Canadians equal access to medical care coast to coast. Never mind the fact that today it's not equal for reasons I have described. But generally speaking, it's pretty good, fairly equal. But what Trudeau said was, Canada's constitution forbids me as the prime minister to provide Canadian citizens with equal and free, that word, when he means prepaid, medical care. Why? Because the Constitution says that medical care is the right of each province to control itself. And the federal government has no right to enter that domain. So here's how I'm going to do it. Since the federal government has the individual taxing power, I'm going to tax the hell out of the citizens, everybody, coast to coast. And when I get all that extra money in, I'm going to tell all the provinces, if you provide portability, equality of medical care, there were 5 main principles of Canadian medical care. If you agree to provide your citizens according to those 5 principles, we will pay half the costs. As a federal government, we'll write you a check every year for half the cost of doing that. It was a brilliant move, but it was an illegal move constitutionally, in the sense that he was doing an end run around our own constitution to do something which the Constitution itself forbid the federal government to do within a province. But that's how he did it. He just said, you do it, and if you do it according to my 5 rules, I'll pay half the cost for you, 50%. Some provinces complain like crazy. And doctors who were now accused of wanting to do extra billing, meaning beyond whatever charge the government was willing to pay for your pancreas operation or whatever it is you were doing, these listed services all had a dollar figure beside them, agreed to by the federal government. But if a doctor in, say, the province of Alberta agreed to do the pancreas operation, but he wanted to charge double that, the government said, that's extra billing. If you want to do extra billing in your province, we're not going to pay the 50% cost in your province. So the province, some of them said, to hell with you. We're staying free. We love to be free. We want our doctors are private citizens. We're not going to have them kicked around by you. So they stuck it out for a couple of years, and finally they caved in. Why? Because there was, in the case of Alberta, I'm guessing now, but $5, $6, $10 billion on the table that they could grab simply by obeying the 5 principles of socialized medical care coast to coast in Canada. Well, that's how Canada got socialized medical care. As I say, it's a private system. These are all private doctors, but they are forbidden by law. You go to jail or you pay a big fine if you actually dare to charge a private citizen more than the listed cost, the government's listed cost of this service. You will go to jail, pay a fine, whatever. Not many people have gone to jail, by the way, or paid the fine because they don't want to go to jail or pay the fine. So they all came to heel. Mm-hmm. So that's how you socialize a nation like Canada, where anti-socialism was written into our own constitution by our founders. That's how you get around it.
I see. Let's talk about Let's talk a little bit about socializing costs. I remember that you said in your first chapter that in the early 50s, people only paid about 30% of their income. And I suppose that now it's pretty much around 60 or 70% of their total income by indirect and direct taxation?
No, it's not that high. I think if you look at total taxation in Canada, which includes taxation on gasoline, booze, roads, whatever, I don't know, all this stuff. I mean, I think Canada was over 50% under Trudeau Sr., but we got into terrible trouble over it financially. In fact, at one time, when Prime Minister Brian Mulroney became Prime Minister after Trudeau, the first thing he said when he walked into office, listen to this, he said, Canada is bankrupt. That's what he said in public. Well, he wasn't far off. We were heading towards fiscal bankruptcy. So something had to give. So he started it, and then Jean Chrétien, who's a liberal, actually did a better job than him on it, on reshaping Canada's budgets, and drove it down to, I don't know, 47% of total taxation or something like that. We are not as bad as a lot of the European socialist states, but it's still bad compared to our biggest trading partner, which is the USA. I think they're around 32, 33% total taxation.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
what about unfunded liabilities? Do you
Okay.
take?
A good question, because if you add unfunded liabilities, which governments have, the federal government has, and so do some of the provinces, oh, you're talking, I mean, these amount to a tax on future generations. All these unfunded liabilities are a tax on future generations. And I think it's probably the most grievous moral rupture in the country, fiscally speaking, because our children and their children are going to be paying for current consumption. And it's not right to ask future generations to pay for current consumption. There's an argument about them helping to pay for the bridge that they're going to be using, but not for your medical care, you know, that kind of thing.
Yes. You also mentioned in your first chapter that married couples, for example, are heavily taxed compared to unmarried couples or even gay partners. Can you explain this twisted reality of weird incentives? Like, is that part of the way to continue and dissolve the family?
Well, I think the idea that I was part of a group that resisted so-called gay marriage, by the way. My wife, who's one of the brightest people I know, said, "Oh, Bill, it's over. Marriage itself has been crumbling." And people who are not gay or not homosexual were part of that problem, helping the crumble ordinary marriage. I said, "You're right, but just because somebody's standing on the edge of the cliff is no reason to push them over," which I think what we've done in the case of gay marriage, for example. In Canada now, it's bizarre. We use the phrase any two persons. We say any two persons may marry. This is a phrase with which we have not yet come to any final conclusion, because it basically means people who want the considerable benefits of marriage can get them by saying they're married, even when they're not doing the things that married people generally do. Well, what are those things? Well, one of them is what the government calls conjugality. And they don't say this, by the way, in the courts. I have looked. I wanted to do a good article on this question of conjugality, because conjugality usually has to do with a male and a female joining sexually, having sexual union within the marriage. In fact, conjugal comes from the Latin word conjugere or conjugere, which means to join. Well, you can't join two penises and you can't join two vaginas. So the logic for the courts to use the word conjugality with respect to any two persons is completely corrupt, as you can see. And I tried to fight this at the time, but it was a lost cause. You just get called a bigot and all kinds of other things for trying to defend the most sensible arguments against it. So I remember being in a public debate, and this fellow homosexual guy said to me, "But we love each other. We love each other." And I said, "What's love got to do with it?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, the government has no right to be involved in whether or not you and another guy or girl love each other. Marriage for the government is not about love. In fact, I take the libertarian view, the government should not have no right to be involved in private marriage whatsoever, except for one thing. It's not private. You're supplying the state itself with its own future survival in the form of children. And the likelihood of two heterosexual people having children in this country, at least, is extremely high. I think something like, 93% of all married couples in Canada do have children. So the government has a motive for supporting marriage and all the things that go with support, the various laws, insurance breaks, and who knows what that they give to married couples, but not to others. "Oh, that's discrimination." And we hear, "You're discriminating against me." And I say, "Well, of course, all policies discriminate." "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, a policy that doesn't discriminate is not a policy. It's just a handout." What do you mean by that? I said, well, for example, if you are a veteran, a military veteran in this country, you can get veteran rights, but you can't get them if you're not a veteran. That's discrimination. The policy discriminates in favor of veterans when it comes to retired soldiers' rights in this country. The same is true with children's rights and children's benefits. If you want those, you have to be a child, and so on. And old age benefits. The government discriminates in terms of old age benefits. You have to be old. Over 65 is the rule generally in most countries today. That's discrimination. So my view is that positive discrimination of this kind is extremely helpful in the formation of a society. And the government, any government that wants the state to survive, has a vested interest, not in love, because if you were going to say that the reason the government should support your marriage is because you love somebody, then what happens when you fall out of love? Should the government then withdraw from your marriage, withdraw all the support it's been giving you? No, because the government's not interested in whether you love the guy or the girl or not. What it's interested in is producing more children for the survival of the state itself. And you can't do that with another guy. And that was my main fiscal argument and moral argument for why governments should not be supporting homosexual marriage. If they want to run off and live together, that's their business in a private society. I suppose we can't do much about that. But that's very different from giving them the blessings of a conjugal union when it's illogical to begin with. So did I get very far with that argument? No, because the force of public will, namely for liberty and equality, which is are the terms that they use, was overpowering. So I said to this fellow, I said, listen, you're tarnishing one of the great symbols of marital life in the West, one of the great symbols, which is the union of marriage. You're tarnishing it by pushing for gay marriage when you can't produce anything that the state requires from a conjugal union. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, let me give you an example. We have a military cross here. It's called the Victoria Cross. It's given only to those who've demonstrated exceptional courage in battle. Tell me what you think would happen if we came out in public and gave that medal to a single coward. What would happen to the stature of that medal? You know what? Even this guy who was fighting me on all the arguments, I see, he said, I understand. Okay, of course. There's such a thing as public reputation, image, stature of an institution. And I said, yeah. And I said, I'm a conservative, a traditional conservative, not a modern conservative, by the way, who tend to be only fiscal conservatives. They're interested in budgets and taxes and all the rest of it, and so am I. But that's a small aspect of what it means to be a real conservative. And on that, I take Roger Scruton's great advice. He said, true conservatism is about love. And I said, what do you mean? Because I met him and chatted with him. He said, a true conservative loves everything old. Old friends, old institutions, old wine, all these things that have a venerable aspect to their nature. They've been around because they've been good and useful and practical for eons, and people know that. And the guy to whom I made the argument about giving the Victoria Cross to a coward realized instantly what I meant when I said, that's what you're doing to marriage. It doesn't make me popular with the gay community here, but I don't care. I just make the argument.
It's the argument that matters. I would like to ask you about private values versus public policy. You wrote in the first chapter that they want to rationalize society by means of policy instrument. Can you please explain that?
Well, to rationalize society, I guess, would mean trying to make it consistent from top to bottom. That's why I called it the top-down state. The state wants to penetrate all of society, especially the private family, which is what this talk is about, by eliminating those aspects of private families which are not rational. For example, for an egalitarian state, It's not rational that you're wealthy and the guy around the corners, his family's not. Because you can't have an egalitarian state when some families are wealthy and some are poor. So we've got to equalize incomes insofar as possible in this country. That's what I mean. And that's the kind of argument, the rationalization of policy instruments to bring about a greater equality and therefore what these people consider a greater public good. Now, what happens when government gets that involved in your country? Well, there's many things that happen. One of them is they become too complicated. Modern states, in my view, have become too complicated to actually operate effectively. They're a mess. Almost everything they do ends up in a kind of mess. And you can see that in the symbolic lives, so to speak, of our politicians, who are always getting in trouble over something or other because modern states are too complicated. They're too hard to run. Nobody can do it. So that's an argument, by the way, for smaller states, for breaking up some of these massive nations into smaller entities. And by the way, in America, there's a fellow whose name escapes me at the moment. He's written a very good book about renationalizing America as 5 different countries. You could almost see it happening now, the blue states, the red states, and so on. You could make a whole nation out of each coast, then a whole nation out of the South, and a whole nation out of the North and the Midwest. Maybe that's the way to go in the future. I don't know. But I don't think there's any way out of it myself, and I'm not a pessimist, but I think it's the nature of human beings who get very busybody about policies to overly complicate a human life. The second reason welfare states in particular, and all socialist states, crumble is because they have no price signals. And I mentioned this in a lengthy disquisition in my Trouble with Canada book, where there's a little bit on the problem of absence of price signals in welfare states. No one knows what something costs.
I apologize. That's the theory of money by Ludwig von Mises, right?
Yes, of course. And so, I mean, I didn't invent it myself. I hope you didn't get that impression. I was just cribbing, I guess. It's famous. It's this idea that you need price signals to run an economy. In Canada, for example, I mean, I had my shoulder replaced some years ago. It was a judo accident when I went to the Olympic Games in Japan. I stayed there for 6 months, and I took up judo just to stay active because I didn't want to run for a while. I was a runner there. And Doug Rogers, who was Canada's silver medalist in judo, he was a 260-pound guy, broke my shoulder. He basically threw me over his back one day, and he didn't want me to hit the ground too hard, so he pulled on my arm, and the whole thing popped out. It was unbelievable. So 30 years later, I had to get it replaced. Well, after they did the shoulder surgery, I said to the doctor, I said, "What did this cost?" And he said, "Pardon?" I said, what's it cost to have your shoulder replaced in a Canadian hospital? He said, "I have no idea." He said, "No one ever asked me." He said, I just do it. I said, "Oh, you just do it." I said, "So this operating room, the 4 nurses, the anesthesiologist, you?" I said, "You just do it." He said, "Yeah." So you see, and the hospital sends a bill to the government, and I get a tax bill. And so do you, if you live here. So you see, there's no accountability, and there can't be because no one knows what anything costs. And so that's why these states, which are not only unmanageable, simply because they're too complicated, it's not because people don't try, but how many systems upon systems do you have to invent to run the systems you already have? You know, you get layer upon layer of complicated systems. No one knows how it works. And with no price signals, you can't know how it works economically. And so you get into the situation where you're borrowing like crazy. Look at America now with head socialist Joe Biden talking like trillions of dollars. No one ever used to talk in terms of trillions because no one knew what a trillion was. They still don't. Okay, it's X number of zeros, but really to conceive of $1 trillion, let alone 5 trillion? I mean, how many times, You know, how many dollar bills to get to the moon and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
stacked end to end. It's crazy. So expense, complication, and you know, the layering of these difficulties is why all these states eventually break down. So I'm not Spengler. He wrote a wonderful book on the fall of the West, decline of the West. It's an amazing book. But he's basically putting theoretical point to the fact that no society of this magnitude or difficulty or complication can exist for a long, long time. However, it's amazing how long you can ride them down. I often say this, you know, Rome fell in a day, but it didn't fall all the way in a day. The command changed, and there are all kinds of things that went on with that, like some of those barbarians, you know, they were already Christians, and to some extent they re-educated the Romans in this regard. But and I don't want to speak too much about that because I don't know enough about it. All I'm going to say is it takes a long time to ruin a very expensive, complicated state. One of the ways that the experts do that, and in Canada, all the media, all the professors, all the big corporate people, they're all experts in the sense that they earn more money than anybody else. They have nicer homes than anybody else. They drive nicer cars than anybody else. And that goes for all the big government folks too. I tell you, you can ride it down for a long time. How do they do that? Well, they build gated communities. They have gates around these communities, and you can't get in unless you live there, and you can show proof to somebody at the gate that you have a home there, that kind of stuff. And even if there's no gate, everybody knows where the best neighborhoods are and who lives there. In fact, people drive around, you can see them pointing, so-and-so lives in that house, and so-and-so in that house. But they're not like us. You know, they're very different. They're not like us. They're riding the system down, and it can go on for generations. If you go to the main airport in Ottawa in Canada, I was there once. I was stranded with a flight that, you know, something happened. I had to spend 2 hours sitting in the waiting area, and I just saw this endless parade of nice-looking people with shirts and ties and nice skirts and dresses on and black briefcases going left and right and right and left. It was a whole stream of government people because that's, you know, Canada's capital city and capital city airport. And they were all coming and going. And you know what? My bet is most of them were flying first class, which most people don't do. So once you see that going on, you realize that these countries can be kept going. That's the right phrase. They can be kept going for a long time on the way down. Oh, I forgot. You have to add the Filipino nannies, by the way, who are wonderful nannies, sending almost all the money they earn back to the Philippines,
Yes.
you know, and so on. So that's the profile. Now, I wrote an article I recommend to your readers. It was published in the Epoch Times. It was called Democracy and the Anti-Polis. Now, we came online today, and I have to go soon, but we came online today to talk about the state and the family. In ancient times, and Aristotle in particular, the idea of the state was that the state is one big family. The family is the smallest state, so to speak. But when he said state, he didn't mean welfare state, although they did lots of that too when they got in trouble. And so did the Romans, the so-called bread and circuses stuff that they made public to keep the angry public happy. But the long and short of it is Aristotle's model of the state was the polis, and the polis was the happy, well-functioning family of all the people, you know, and even the model of the family itself. He said, well, the father is kind of like the dictator. He's the head of the republic of the family. The mother is like the first minister. She kind of gets things done inside the family. He's connecting the family with the other families and the outer world and all that. And the children, of course, are like the subjects of the state. They're the subjects of the parents. And so his model for the state was, in fact, the family. But that has changed drastically in our own time, as we know, because the egalitarian state is not like what he had in mind, or anybody ever had in mind. And we never had the means to actually do it before. Every other so-called egalitarian society has crumbled. Look at the kibbutz in Israel. I mean, it started out with a radical, quasi-Marxist egalitarian ideal, you know, and I don't know a lot about it, but I've read enough to say it's not now what it was then and when it began.
Completely collapsed. Yes.
Completely collapsed. Why did it ever begin that way? It's another question for you to answer, not me, by the way. Why have so many incredibly bright Jewish intellectuals been at the forefront of social theory when it comes to developing the egalitarian state, whether it be Marx or his buddies or whoever?
Yeah, but in the same time, you have Rothbard and you have Ayn Rand and you have Mises and a few others who are on the right side.
You do. Well, one of the reasons that Milton Friedman came up with in an essay that he wrote about this was that because the Jewish religion, like the Christian religion, is an expectational religion. The Messiah hasn't come yet. Once you start secularizing these kinds of theological beliefs, you end up with wanting to create the kingdom of heaven on earth, which is what the Marxist and socialist state is supposed to be. In fact, I forget the name of the Russian general. I think it was Shukov, or if my memory serves me correctly. When the Soviet Union fell, and we can probably wrap up on this, when the Soviet Union fell, Time magazine sat him down. And without using these words, what they basically said was, what the hell were you people doing over there? And the footnote was, you know, murdering millions and millions of your own citizens and to bring about this ideal state. What the hell were you doing? You know what Shukov said? And I'm all but quoting him. He said, the kingdom of heaven on earth before the third millennium. That's what we were doing.
Wow.
This gets us into a subject I enjoy, by the way, and in my book, I'm sorry to go on about my books, but I got so involved in this, I wrote a book called The Trouble with Democracy. And there's a large section in that book on ancient Gnosticism, which has a lot to do with the kingdom of heaven on earth and how you create it. This comes out of a thesis called the Secularization Thesis. Once you kick God out of the room, once God is kicked out, you've still got the wiring and the architecture for the room that you're trying to build. God's gone, but the room's not. And you can try to build the kingdom of heaven on earth without God. That's what the Gnostics tried to do when they got secularized, because the religious Gnostics, I mean, they just wanted to get rid of everything and go to the great heaven beyond this earth and all that sort of thing. But the secularized guys who took on board those theological presumptions, they were trying to create the kingdom of heaven on earth. And I think that underlies almost all of modern social welfare theory. Call it what you want, you know, socialism or social welfare or statism. You know, it all ties in with that desire. And once you get people devoted to that idea, I mean, and may I mention just one conclusion I've come to, and then I've got to go, is I think in countries like Canada, and this is a danger that my adult children are aware of, thankfully, is you end up with what I call a tripartite state. Now, what's a tripartite state? Well, it's a state in which 1/3 of the citizens are working for the government. 1/3 of the citizens are creating the wealth, and 1/3 of the citizens are being paid something significant in cash or in kind. So they're not letting that go. Anyone can see that 2 of those tripartite sections of the state can always gang up on the productive sector. And when they get big enough, those 2 segments, that's what happens. They collude, they join hands. They want more government because they're getting something more from government. And you guys who are doing all the producing, just keep going, please, because we're going to take as much of it as we want to keep this gravy train rolling. Now, I call that the tripartite state. And I think that's where these libertarian socialist countries end up, inevitably so. They end up as tripartite states. So the symbol for this is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner.
Absolutely. You have to go, or you have 4
I have
minutes
to
more?
go.
You
I
have
have
to go.
4 minutes more we can do. 4 minutes more, let's do it. I don't want to overstay my welcome. I'm sorry.
No, you're very welcome. You can stay here for hours. I will be so happy to have you here. One thing, tomorrow we are going to have a talk about Islam, and the main topic is the Gnostic roots, the origins of Gnosticism in Islam. So you are welcome to join. And I would just like to try to allow two members here to ask quick questions, if you allow me.
Please.
So, yes, Sus, can you go ahead? I guess he's not here. 1 second. Endgame, you wanted to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, ask a question. Because you're short on time, but I would like to quote actually what you initially said regarding gay marriage, and that the government shouldn't be, supporting this because, and then you said something because the marriage cannot provide for the state through, and I missed the rest because I was trying to write it down, and then I have another, and then I have a question. Would you mind repeating that?
Oh dear.
We have a recording. I will send you the recording of the event.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Give me the recording when you're finished. So the question here is because nowadays they're pushing this agenda to say that men can get pregnant. How will you treat that?
Well, I think it's some kind of joke. So
it is a joke.
A man cannot become a woman cannot become a man. And so by the way, I don't know why an otherwise intelligent society would capitulate to these stupidities. I mean, even young children in school can tell you that's a crazy idea and it's not possible. Why are adults pretending that it is? It's very dangerous in the sense that it's destabilizing the confidence that younger people ought to have in their society. Look at athletics, which is a world I've spent quite a bit of time in. Transgender athletics and that kind of stuff. I don't understand why someone who's commenting on a transgender athlete, say a guy who now thinks he's a girl, so he's weightlifting, and the commentator will talk about him as her, even though he knows that there's no she there, there's no her there. Why does he actually go along with that? Now, as a journalist, say it's a newspaper reporting, he's supposed to be dedicated to the truth, to discovering the truth and speaking the truth boldly, not caving in to the political demands of whoever it is that he happens to be talking or writing about. So, to me, I don't get that. And even if he's going to take a lot of flack and get arguments for it, so what? That's what he's supposed to do.
We need to have a lot less tolerance for stupidity.
Yes.
Last question, if I may. Sus, you want to try?
Yes. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello, William. William,
Hello.
You could check it out, but I believe that if you've got a private business, then it's a voluntary contribution. And after 90 days, all your utility bills are paid by your other birth certificate. So they're double dipping.
Her voice was breaking up.
It's very hard to hear you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I said that you could check it out, but your tax, if you have a private business, is a voluntary contribution. And after 90 days, all your utility bills are paid by your first birth certificate that's on the stock market.
She's talking about natural law and a lot of other things we are trying to research.
I don't quite understand what she's saying, but if she's talking in any respect about, for example, tax on corporations, my argument is that there's no such thing as a corporate tax except in name. And the reason is that if corporations can't sustain their margins, say in manufacturing, it's a 3 to 5% margin just to stay in business. If they can't sustain their margin, they go broke and they're gone. So when you tax a corporation, a new tax, let's say, they have to raise their prices. The prices are reflected in the price of the product that the customers are buying. So it's actually a consumer tax. It's not a corporate tax. It's what I call a pass-through tax. The corporation says, okay, you're charging us $400,000 we never had to pay before. So the price of every widget that we sell is going up $10. So the guy in the street's going to pay the $10. It ends up in his hands, not in the corporation's hands. Corporations don't pay taxes.
Yeah, you're right, as usual. William, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to keep you any longer because you said you have to leave. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your knowledge and your willingness to share that with us. And we will be seeing you again in 2 weeks, correct?
In 2 weeks. Thank you, and thank you to your members for having me. Bye.
We love it. Bye-bye. Take care. I will send you the recording very quickly.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. I'm going to open the floor for free conversation if you guys like.